June 29, 2023, 911 dispatchers received a call from 18-year-old Emma Kusak, who said that she had fatally shot someone inside the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. By the time officers arrived at the crime scene on the 12th floor, Kusak had fled the scene with the victim's keys, wallet, and cell phone. Inside one of the rooms, Charlie Satrastegui was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Kusak later turned herself in and told detectives that she didn't mean to do it while she was being taken into custody. She said that she and Satrastegui had met on the Bumble dating app roughly 2 months prior to the shooting, and that she was looking for strictly platonic friendship. After a few months of texting, Satrastegui visited Las Vegas from California and asked Kusak if she wanted to hang out. She took him up on the offer and later said that they spent the evening drinking in Satrastegui's hotel room. The night supposedly took a left turn when Satrastegui tried to kick Kusak out of his room for coughing loudly in her sleep. Kusak claimed that she shot Satrastegui in self-defense as he charged at her, causing her to fear for her safety. But instead of sticking by her story and leaving her fate up to a jury, Kusak pleaded guilty to second-degree murder with the use of a deadly weapon in September 2024. She was sentenced to 11 to 27.5 years in prison and will be in her late 20s when she becomes eligible for parole in 2033. Number 13. Karl Groschen. While responding to the reported discovery of 2 dead bodies inside a Henderson, Nevada residence in October 2024, police found the remains of 44-year-old Anastasia Akutsina and her son, 20-year-old Sergei Scoggins. Akutsina had been shot to death in the driver's seat of her and Groschen's car, while Scoggins was found murdered in the family's laundry room. The 911 call had come from Akutsina's husband, 41-year-old Karl Groschen, who told the dispatcher, "You need to come here now. There is a huge crime scene." As officers arrived at the scene, Groschen exited the home with several prescription pill bottles, 2 phones, a phone charger, and a beverage in his hands. He set the items down and peacefully surrendered while claiming that he believed the victims were trying to kill him. There was a young child at the scene who was placed into the care of social services. Groschen refused to speak any further with detectives, but a neighbor reported seeing Groschen kicking his stepson, Scoggins, out of the house. The sound of gunshots soon followed, at which point the neighbor saw Groschen running across his yard and into the house before more gunfire broke out. Inside the residence, police found bottles containing pills that had been prescribed to Groschen and are typically used to treat anxiety, major depressive disorder, ADHD, and sleep disorders. The murder weapon was found in the garage, and there was no evidence that Akutsina or Scoggins were trying to kill Groschen, who faces 2 counts of open murder with a deadly weapon. He remains in custody at the Clark County Detention Center amid the ongoing case. In December 2024, prosecutors announced their intention to pursue the death penalty. Meanwhile, Groschen's mental stability came into question, prompting the judge to order him to undergo a competency evaluation. He was found competent to proceed in early 2025. Number 12. Patricia Atalig. 29-year-old Patricia Atalig of Las Vegas committed the unthinkable in January of 2021 when she beat her young stepson Marcel to death while his father was at work. Emergency responders were summoned to the scene after the boy's dad returned home 30 minutes later and found his son unresponsive in his bedroom. Marcel had suffered head trauma, multiple skull fractures, bleeding on the brain, and other injuries that were consistent with abuse, including a fractured arm, abdominal injuries, and bruising indicative of strangulation. A family friend who was present during the suspected fatal beating told investigators that Atalig had sent Marcel to his room for being disrespectful and refusing to eat his lunch. For approximately 5 minutes, the friend overheard what he thought was the sound of Atalig spanking Marcel, followed by a noise which sounded like the boy hitting the wall or falling onto the floor. During questioning, Atalig admitted to slapping the boy across his face, grabbing him by the shirt and slamming him against the floor twice and slamming his head into the floor at least 2 more times. She was charged with open murder and child abuse resulted in death. In December 2022, Atalig pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and felony child abuse. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. During the sentencing hearing, the judge acknowledged that Atalig had endured a rough upbringing and suffered from other issues, but that this didn't mitigate the severity of her actions. Number 11. Robert Brown. Nevada is a death penalty state, but no executions have been carried out since 2006 due to difficulties obtaining lethal injection drugs. For this and other reasons, it's rare for murder cases to end in capital punishment sentences these days, even when the crime is undeniably heinous, but it still happens from time to time. And in October 2024, 54-year-old Robert Brown Jr. became the first Nevada inmate to be sentenced to death in 5 years when he was sent to death row for the 2012 murder of his ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Nicole Nick. Brown fatally shot Nick in a Las Vegas apartment hours after an argument and fired 6 bullets into Nick's 58-year-old mother. Esther Maestas, who miraculously survived. Nick's young niece was also present at the scene and narrowly avoided being shot by a bullet that struck her bed. Brown had previously served 7 years at a California prison for trying to kill his ex-wife and also had a prior carjacking conviction, indicating a proclivity for violence, but he wasn't arrested for Nick's murder until more than a year after it happened, in April of 2014. When the case finally went to trial more than a decade later, the defense focused on Brown's history of mental health issues and moral arguments against the death penalty, including that an eye for an eye is not the answer. But the jury disagreed, instead aligning itself with the prosecution's stance that capital punishment is appropriate given the severity of Brown's crimes. Number 10. James Michael Biela. 19-year-old Brianna Zunino Dennison vanished sometime between 4 and 9 o'clock a.m. while spending the night at a friend's house in Reno, Nevada in January 2008. The young woman's friend awoke to find a small blood stain on Dennison's pillow and all her belongings left behind, including her shoes, purse, and cell phone. Authorities launched a search for Dennison, whose whereabouts remained a mystery until 3 weeks later when a man discovered her body in a ditch while returning to his workplace from a lunch break. She had been assaulted and strangled to death with the strap of a pair of thong underwear, and there was a pair of women's underwear lying on the ground nearby that didn't belong to her. By the time Dennison's remains were found, at least 2 other college-aged women had reported being victims of attempted assaults in the months leading up to Dennison's murder. Police believed Dennison was likely the victim of a serial attacker, and a confidential witness pointed them in the direction of 27-year-old James Michael Biela of Sparks. The tip came from a friend of Biela's girlfriend, who recalled finding a mystery woman's underwear in Biela's truck. When questioned by police, Biela denied any involvement in the crime, but he also refused to provide a DNA sample for elimination purposes, which only caused detectives' suspicions to grow. Police then spoke with Biela's girlfriend and the mother of his son, who cooperated with the investigation. The woman confirmed that she had found underwear that didn't belong to her in Biela's truck and provided a DNA sample from their son for comparison purposes. Biela turned up as a match to Dennison's killer and was positively linked to one of the previous assaults that he had been identified as a suspect in. In November 2008, roughly 8 months after Dennison's death, Biela was charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and assault. Prosecutors accused him of entering Dennison's friend's home through an unlocked door, placing a pillow over her face and kidnapping her during the early morning hours. Biela was found guilty on all counts in May of 2010 and sentenced to death by lethal injection. Biela's most recent death row appeal was rejected in 2022, but there's been no word on an execution date being set. Number 9. Robert Matthew Richards. When 25-year-old Sarah Filiatraut failed to contact her family in Michigan following her release from the Leon County Jail on March 21, 2024, they knew something was wrong. The young woman had been arrested 3 days earlier for possession of drug paraphernalia and public intoxication, and it was unlike her not to reach out to her loved ones after regaining her freedom. Law enforcement launched an investigation into Filiatraut's disappearance the following month after hearing from her father, who told them that Filiatraut had not been active on social media since the day of her release from jail. Investigators traced her last known whereabouts to the residence of a friend in Fernley and learned that Filiatraut had left the property after calling a phone number with the California area code from her friend's phone and asking someone for a ride. Authorities appealed to the public for information on Filiatraut's whereabouts, but her location remained a mystery until 2 months later, when her body was discovered in a remote part of Churchill County. According to court documents, she had been strangled and bludgeoned to death at or near an RV park in Fernley. 5 days later, police spoke with a person of interest, 39-year-old Robert Matthew Richards, who reportedly admitted over the phone to being the last person that Filiatraut was seen alive with. Meanwhile, Richards' former boss told police that he had stopped coming to work because he said he was being investigated for murder and that he was bailing out. A multi-month, multi-agency search for Roberts finally came to an end 2 months later in July of 2024 when he was apprehended in Salt Lake County, Utah. He fought extradition to Nevada but ultimately lost and was transferred to the Leon County Jail on a first-degree murder charge. The judge in Leon County denied bail after hearing about the severity of the charge against Richards, as well as his criminal history, which contains several prior violent felony convictions. The prosecutors also depicted Richards as a flight risk, noting that he doesn't live in Nevada and contested his extradition. If convicted as charged, he could face life in prison or even the death penalty. His alleged motive for killing Filiatraut and the specific circumstances leading up to the murder remain unclear. Number 8. Michael Martin. 65-year-old pilot Michael Martin disappeared after taking off from the North Las Vegas airport for a routine flight on January 2, 2025. His family reported him missing 3 days later. Martin's wife of 40 years, Kathy, told the Las Vegas Review-Journal that she and Michael had gotten in a little tiff before he vanished, but that the matter had been squared away and that Michael wasn't upset when he left the house the next morning. According to flight data and other records, Martin took off at 10:51 a.m. without telling anyone, and his transponder stopped transmitting less than a half hour later at 11:15. On January 18th, more than 2 weeks after Martin vanished, his wrecked plane was found on Mount Jefferson. It had crashed on extremely rough terrain at an altitude of 11,300 feet, making for an incredibly complicated and difficult recovery effort. Based on the damage, authorities surmised that there was no way Martin survived the accident. Several days later, Martin's remains were found in the Mount Jefferson area. Both the plane and his body have been recovered, and the investigation into the cause of the deadly accident is ongoing. Number 7. Ely State Prison Brawl. 3 inmates were stabbed to death and 9 others were injured during a massive fight at the Ely State Prison in July of 2024. Located in rural White Pine County in the northeastern part of the state, Ely is one of Nevada's 6 prisons. It houses an estimated 1,200 inmates, including all of the state's death row prisoners, and is home to an execution chamber that has never been used. But there have been no executions in Nevada since 2006, due to the state's inability to acquire the drugs necessary to perform lethal injections. Included among those killed in the 2024 brawl were 41-year-old convicted murderer and white supremacist gang leader Anthony Williams, 22-year-old Connor Brown, and 43-year-old Zachariah Lutz. Williams and Lutz were among 23 members of the Aryan Warriors prison gang who were named in a sweeping indictment for an array of serious crimes in August 2019. At the time of the deadly fight that claimed his life, Lutz was serving a minimum 8.5-year sentence for felony racketeering and forgery charges, which he had pleaded guilty to in 2023. Williams was serving life without parole for the murder of Andrew Ryan Thurgood, who was stabbed to death in his cell at High Desert State Prison in southern Nevada in 2016 while serving time for stealing a car. Connor Brown, who has not been named in media reports as an Aryan Warriors member, was serving a 7 to 20-year sentence for robbery with a deadly weapon. He had pleaded guilty to the charge in 2021 after stabbing a gas station clerk and a casino patron in Reno the previous year. Authorities have remained tight-lipped about the circumstances leading up to the deadly fight, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. At the time of the brawl, Ely was Nevada's highest-level maximum security prison. In September 2024, authorities announced that the facility was being reduced to medium security status and that its high security and death row prisoners would be swapped with inmates at High Desert State Prison in southern Nevada. The decision came amid difficulties keeping Ely fully staffed, while prisons to the south were being operated by more ample workforces. Number 6. Margaret Rudin. Las Vegas real estate magnate Ronald Rudin suddenly vanished one afternoon in 1994 after leaving his office on foot to visit his wife Margaret's nearby antique shop. His charred remains were found weeks later near Lake Mojave, roughly 2 hours outside of Vegas. Someone had shot the multimillionaire in the head at least 4 times and burned his body. While searching the Rudins' home, police found blood spatter and other evidence, indicating that Margaret knew more about what had happened to her husband than she was admitting to. Detectives suspected that she had shot Ronald while he slept, but she denied any wrongdoing. The investigation dragged on for the next year and a half until a major break came in the form of the murder weapons discovery in Lake Mead in July of 1996. Margaret was indicted for Ronald's murder the following year, but changed her appearance and went on the run for 31 months. Authorities caught up to her in Massachusetts in 1999 and extradited her back to Vegas, where she went on trial in March of 2001. Prosecutors accused Margaret of shooting Ronald because he planned to divorce her, which would have resulted in the loss of the half of Ronald's $11 million estate that Margaret was entitled to as long as they stayed married. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Ronald was killed due to his involvement in illegal activities and poked holes in the prosecution's theories, including by pointing out the state's theory that someone helped Margaret dispose of Ronald's body but failed to identify who that person might have been. Margaret was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life terms, but she successfully challenged her conviction on the grounds of ineffective counsel. Her conviction was vacated and she was released from prison in 2022 after serving 20 years. Charges against the so-called Black Widow of Las Vegas were dismissed in 2024, and she now enjoys the same freedoms as any other US citizen despite lingering suspicions among many that she's responsible for Ronald's death. Number 5. Brent Clifford. On August 15, 2024, the murdered body of a missing California woman was found at the bottom of a steep embankment along a rural highway in Washoe County, Nevada. 48-year-old Patricia Portela Wright had last been contacted on August 3rd, and she had been reported missing on August 9th after failing to show up at her job. Portela Wright was last seen with her boyfriend, 55-year-old Brent Clifford, who happens to be the son of 79-year-old Doug Clifford, the founding drummer of the band Creedence Clearwater Revival. While investigating Bruce, detectives identified him as a person of interest in a homicide that had occurred in Reno on August 11th, 2 days after Portela Wright was reported missing. Clifford was suspected of killing his friend, 68-year-old William F. Andrews, and stealing the victim's red 2003 Chevy Blazer, prompting law enforcement to issue a be on the lookout notice for the vehicle. 3 days later, police spotted the Blazer in Placer County, California, and followed it to the city of Portola, where they arrested Clifford on fraud charges. Portela Wright's body was found the next day, and Clifford has since been charged with her murder. Authorities have not revealed Portela Wright's cause of death, a suspected motive, or the circumstances leading up to the crime. In addition to the homicide charge, Clifford is facing an identity theft charge for obtaining Portela Wright's identifying information without her consent and trying to use her access card. His alleged motives for killing the victims are unclear. Number 4. John Watson. In July of 2006, retired schoolteacher John Watson gifted his wife of 33 years, Everilda, with a 50th birthday trip to Las Vegas along with a plane ticket to Guatemala to visit her family after the 5-day getaway. The couple, who lived in Ontario, California, had met decades earlier in Guatemala when John was interning in the country. Against her parents' wishes, Everilda moved to the United States and married John, who was in his early 30s. During the first few years of the couple's marriage, Everilda went to high school and got her diploma while John worked as a math teacher. They went on to have 3 sons together. The Watsons seemed to be hitting a high point in their marriage after some difficult years when John surprised Everilda with the Las Vegas vacation. John had recently retired after 37 years of teaching, giving him and Everilda an opportunity to get their relationship back on solid footing. Just a day into the trip, John called the couple's 3 adult sons and told them their mother was missing. The Watsons' sons initially assumed their mother had gone off gambling on her own and weren't too worried, but as the days passed with no word from Everilda, it became clear that something was very wrong. One of the sons reported Everilda missing to the police, and he and his siblings grew even more concerned when their father returned from Las Vegas without their mother. They also noticed that their father didn't seem concerned for their mother's well-being, which seemed unusual, to say the least. John claimed that Everilda had stormed off in a drunken rage during a fight on the first night of their vacation, and that he hadn't seen her since. He told investigators that Everilda called him the next day and said she was driving a woman she had befriended to Los Angeles. Detectives were suspicious of John's story, especially since he had failed to report Everilda missing in Las Vegas. Their concerns were heightened when they found plastic sheeting, incense, cleaning supplies, antifreeze, and air freshener in John's vehicle. Investigators also found an alarming amount of blood in the car, at which point they made the decision to arrest John. While taking him into custody, they found 2 fake IDs in his possession, which he had used to rent the hotel rooms he had stayed in during the Vegas trip. While reviewing surveillance footage from the hotels, investigators observed John walking around in various disguises. Police also found records of him buying cleaning supplies and a bandsaw from a local Walmart store, leading to the conclusion that he had shot Everilda, then dismembered her body and scattered it across the desert. Despite the absence of a body, John Watson was convicted of his wife's murder and sentenced to death. He maintained his innocence and appealed his case with no success, but old age caught up with him before he ever saw an execution date, and he died on death row in 2024 at the age of 84. Number 3. Gregory Bell. 58-year-old Gregory Bell vanished on the evening of Saturday, August 10th, 2024, while paddle boating with his wife Serena and 2 other couples on Lake Mead. His group encountered heavy winds near the Boulder Islands and began trying to paddle back to shore. Serena and the other 2 couples managed to make it back to dry land, but Bell failed to reach safety. Rescuers held out hope that Bell had survived and based their search patterns on where they believed the winds might have taken him, but he wasn't wearing a life jacket when he disappeared, and it was already 8:30 p.m. when he slipped out of sight, which meant that he would have had little daylight to work with in terms of looking for somewhere to land. 4 days after Bell vanished, his body was recovered from Lake Mead, north of Boulder Harbor. The news was made public by Serena, who wrote in a social media post, "It is crushing, but I know the meaning of closure. There is something to be said for it." Today's topic was requested by Smiley Nana 209, Gordon alias me 1104, and Jordan Harris 6801. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Dan Rodimer. Christopher Tapp was released from prison in 2017 after serving 20 years for a murder he didn't commit. His newfound freedom came in light of new evidence in the case of Angie Dodge, who was murdered in her Idaho Falls, Idaho apartment in 1996. There was no physical evidence connecting Tapp to the crime, but investigators developed tunnel vision after identifying him as a person of interest. After hours of grueling questioning, Tapp gave a coerced confession which he later recanted. His bid to prove his innocence was eventually successful, and the real perpetrator, Brian Dripps, is currently serving 20 years to life. Tapp was fully exonerated in 2019, 2 years after his release from prison, and was subsequently awarded a $12 million payout for his wrongful conviction. But he barely got a chance to start living life before he died at a Las Vegas hotel on October 29th, 2023. Police were called to Resorts World, where 47-year-old Tapp was suffering from head injuries. He died several days later at a nearby hospital, and investigators initially believed, based on what they were told by Tapp's lawyer, that he had fallen and hit his head on a coffee table. But an autopsy revealed that Tapp had suffered several brain bleeds from blunt force trauma, indicating that someone had deliberately struck him in the head. And detectives soon learned that he had been in an altercation inside one of the hotel's rooms with former WWE star and ex-Republican congressional candidate Dan Rodimer. After his pro wrestling career went bust, 45-year-old Rodimer had attempted to rebrand himself in the political arena. In 2020, he ran and lost as a Republican for Nevada's 3rd congressional district. He pursued a Texas congressional seat the following year, but was unsuccessful again, despite being endorsed by former President Donald Trump. In April 2024, a grand jury indicted Rodimer on a murder charge. He staunchly maintains his innocence in the ongoing case, and in early 2025, his defense attorney filed a motion appealing the indictment. Authorities have released few details surrounding the incident that led to Tapp's death, including what the alleged fight was over. Right after number 1, we will line up our previous release about when Las Vegas goes wrong. Stick around if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. John Matthew Chapman. While stopping for a roadside bathroom break in the desert outside Las Vegas in October 2019, a traveling family discovered the murdered body of an unidentified woman of uniquely small stature. The remains would eventually be identified through dental records as 33-year-old Jamie Fedden, who suffered from a rare condition called Vater syndrome and was just 4 feet tall and 75 pounds. In November of that year, prior to the identification of Fedden's body, a friend of the missing woman had requested a welfare check at her home. Neighbors told officers that they hadn't seen Fedden or her vehicle in roughly 2 months, and they had recently seen a man whom they thought was her boyfriend coming and going from the home. While searching the residence, police found fake CIA ID cards bearing the name and photo of 39-year-old John Matthew Chapman, along with zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and Fedden's cell phone. During questioning, Chapman told investigators that he lured Fedden into joining him for a cross-country drive under the guise of vacationing together in Las Vegas and the possibility of eventually moving there. The two arrived in Vegas on September 23rd. 2 days later, Chapman persuaded Fedden to participate in a bondage-themed photo shoot in the desert, where, by his own admission, he bound her to a signpost with zip ties, covered her airways with duct tape, and watched as she suffocated to death. Over the next 2 months, Chapman lived at Fedden's house and impersonated her on social media and over text in order to deceive her friends and family into thinking that she was still alive. He also helped himself to the victim's money while making himself at home inside her residence. Fedden's cousin later told police that she began to suspect that someone else was communicating using Fedden's phone based on the nature of the dialogue. The person was unable to answer certain verifying questions that Fedden would have known the answers to, furthering her loved ones' suspicions that they were interacting with an imposter. Following the investigation and the discovery of Fedden's body, Chapman was charged in Pennsylvania with kidnapping, obstructing administration of law, and criminal use of a communication facility. He was also charged and convicted in federal court for kidnapping resulting in death. In August 2024, Chapman was sentenced to the maximum of life in federal prison. There's no parole in the federal system, which means he'll remain behind bars until his dying day. Local authorities received a call regarding an unresponsive male inside a room in Caesar's Palace on May the 15th of 2023. 25-year-old Brian Altamirano Solano from Nicaragua was found unresponsive by a member of the hotel's housekeeping staff. When Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officers arrived at the location on South Las Vegas Boulevard, they determined that the man had suffered an apparent gunshot wound to the chest. Shortly after, responding medical personnel pronounced him dead at the scene. Inculpatory evidence helped authorities identify Erica Covington and Ariana Taylor, both 20, as the suspects. Surveillance footage revealed that prior to the incident, the two women in Altamirano Solano were walking hand in hand and laughing while heading towards his room shortly after 2:30 a.m. Approximately 14 minutes later, Covington and Taylor can be seen running back down the same hallway carrying a bag that allegedly belonged to the victim. They reportedly got into a stolen white car and left the area. After further investigation, authorities also found an Instagram post by Covington that further implicated her and Taylor's involvement in the shooting. In the post, both could be seen in Caesars on the night in question wearing the same clothes that could be seen in the surveillance footage. Both suspects were arrested on May the 17th at an apartment where investigators also found the clothing shown in the video, as well as a Glock magazine. According to the police report, the bullet that took Altamirano Solano's life matched the cartridge casing from another domestic violence case that Taylor had been involved in. In June, Covington and Taylor were indicted on murder and burglary charges. As of the latest updates, both women pleaded not guilty to the charges and were held in custody at the Clark County Detention Center. Number 9. Zvezdan Benkun. 37-year-old Nevada man Slobodan Milos admitted to Las Vegas authorities that he'd used an aluminium bat to kill his wife, Zvezdan Benkun, aged 31. The gruesome incident unfolded at the couple's apartment located at the 9500 block of West Sahara Avenue on the morning of May the 17th of 2019. According to an arrest report, Milos went to a store where he bought the bat and other items on the day in question. On his drive back home, he reportedly sipped on a mixed drink. While Benkun was sleeping in the bed of their home, Milos entered the room and bludgeoned her with the bat. When their teenage son arrived at around 4:30 p.m., he found Benkun unconscious and dialed 911. Responding officers found Milos laying on the bed next to his dying wife and immediately arrested him. The victim was then taken to the University Medical Center where she was pronounced dead. Milos told detectives that he'd reached a boiling point because of their rocky marriage, wherein he felt Benkun had been cheating. He was held without bond at the Clark County Detention Center on a murder charge. Records indicate that Milos was scheduled for a jury trial on September the 11th of 2023. Number 8. Caleb Rogers. A Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officer was accused of perpetrating 3 casino heists between November of 2021 and February of 2022, stealing nearly $165,000. Prosecutors alleged that 35-year-old Caleb Rogers was a gambling addict who targeted casinos off the Las Vegas Strip due to desperation over unpaid debts. Rogers, who'd been in the police force for 7 years, was an active duty patrol officer at the time of the heists. Rogers was only caught after the third heist, which transpired at the Rio All-Suite Hotel and Casino on February the 27th of 2022. He entered the establishment apparently wearing a disguise and carrying a loaded police-issued revolver. He then stormed the sportsbook, shoving a 63-year-old cashier out of his way and threatening to use a gun. After making off with at least $79,000, Rogers was eventually detained by security and later turned over to authorities. According to a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department spokesperson, the man was suspended without pay pending the outcome of his case. In July of 2023, Rogers' brother testified against him in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The brother noted how they had plotted and carried out the first heist together. The federal jury convicted Rogers on account of brandishing a firearm during a crime of violence and 3 counts of interference with commerce by robbery. Rogers is awaiting his sentencing, but is facing life in prison because he brandished the gun during the third heist. Number 7. Mallory Angel Armio. At approximately 12:16 on June the 23rd of 2023, a Nevada woman was allegedly gunned down at a 7-Eleven near Las Vegas Boulevard over a stolen salad. Law enforcement responded to the business in the 500 block of East Sahara Avenue and found Mallory Angel Armio, who was suffering from 2 gunshot wounds to the back. Emergency medical services then arrived and transported the 35-year-old to Sunrise Hospital, where she succumbed to her wounds. Homicide detectives determined that an altercation had ensued between the victim and a 35-year-old store clerk named Ranier Jefferson over the stolen salad. During the course of the argument, Armijo and Jefferson struggled. CCTV footage revealed that after Jefferson had retrieved the salad, he then grabbed a handgun before opening fire at Armijo. The gun was later recovered on the roof of the 7-Eleven. 5 days later, Jefferson was arrested on charges of murder, violation of probation, and possession of a gun by a prohibited person. He was booked into the Clark County Detention Center without bond. Number 6. Tabitha Totsi. In the wake of an argument, a Las Vegas woman was purportedly shot in the head by her boyfriend. The cold-blooded ordeal took place at a residence in the 8100 block of Lagarde Drive shortly before 11 a.m. on April the 22nd of 2023. When local police arrived, they found the wounded woman identified as 26-year-old Tabitha Totsi. The boyfriend, however, had already absconded with Totsi's vehicle, according to a witness. Totsi was taken to a medical center where she died 2 days later. The Clark County Coroner's Office subsequently ruled her death a homicide. After being named as the suspect in the killing, a state warrant was issued for Totsi's 26-year-old boyfriend, Oswaldo Nathanael Perez Sanchez. Perez Sanchez remains at large as of the making of this video, and reports indicate that he is considered armed and dangerous. He is facing multiple charges including murder, coercion constituting domestic violence, robbery, and grand larceny of a motor vehicle. On June the 21st, the FBI's Las Vegas field office offered a reward of up to $10,000 for information that could lead to his arrest. Number 5. Kenneth Cherry Jr. A Las Vegas shooting that occurred on February the 23rd of 2013 claimed the lives of several people, including Kenneth Cherry Jr. The 27-year-old rapper, who went by the name Kenny Clutch, had a heated confrontation with a man in the valet area of a local hotel. According to the police, Cherry and the man drove northbound on Las Vegas Boulevard in their respective vehicles. The latter, who was driving a Range Rover, fired several rounds into the former's Maserati, which consequently careened out of control. The Maserati slammed into several cars, one of which burst into flames, killing 2 of its occupants in the aftermath. Upon the deaths of 3 people, including Cherry, a manhunt was launched by authorities. 26-year-old Amar Harris, who was a convicted felon in South Carolina, and 22-year-old Tanisha LaShawn Howard were identified as persons of interest. Harris was the alleged shooter, while Howard was in the Range Rover during the incident. Police found Howard on February the 27th, but she was cleared of any involvement. Harris was later convicted of 11 felony charges, which included 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was formally sentenced to death on January the 4th of 2016 and locked up at Eli State Prison. Number 4. Jarrell Ng. Law enforcement were called to an apartment on the 9000 block of West Katy Avenue in Las Vegas, Nevada at around 11 p.m. on March the 22nd of 2021. 37-year-old Emily Ikuta told a police dispatcher that she found her husband face down on the floor after returning to their Spring Valley home from walking their dog. Ikuta told investigators that 36-year-old Jarrell Ng might have accidentally shot himself while cleaning a gun. She claimed that she had found his firearm on the floor near Ng and then locked it in a closet. According to detectives, Ikuta's version of events was inconsistent with the evidence at the scene. Acquaintances of the victim told detectives that Ng was on a live chat with them when they heard a slapping noise they believed was a gunshot. Neighbors also heard the couple arguing at the time of the incident. Ikuta was then held without bond on March the 25th for open murder after the police department's homicide section ruled out the possibility that the gun had accidentally gone off in Ng's hands. 14 months later, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder by way of an Alford plea. This meant that the defendant maintained her innocence, but admitted the prosecution's evidence would probably result in a guilty verdict. On August 3rd of 2022, she was ordered to serve 10 to 25 years in the Nevada Department of Corrections as part of the agreement. Number 3. Judith Ann DeAndrade. 37-year-old Judith Ann DeAndrade from Las Vegas, Nevada was caught carrying $800,000 worth of methamphetamine by authorities in Nebraska. Officers stopped a Toyota Camry on Interstate 80 shortly after 2:30 p.m. on March the 9th of 2022. After a probable cause was developed to search the vehicle, officers found 18.5 pounds of methamphetamine, 40 grams of fentanyl, used syringes, and $2,620 in cash. According to the Lancaster Sheriff's Office, DeAndre and another woman in the vehicle named Erika Marie Downs, aged 35, were then taken into custody. They were both booked into jail for charges of possession of methamphetamine with intent to deliver, possession of money while in possession of controlled substances, and evading taxes. A month after her arrest, DeAndre was found dead in her cell due to what were later determined to have been bacteria in her heart. As of the latest updates, Downs pleaded guilty on March the 28th of 2023 and was awaiting sentencing. Number 2. Lakeisha N. Holloway. In the winter of 2015, dozens of people were mowed down at the Las Vegas Strip by a vehicle driven by 24-year-old Oregon woman Lakeisha N. Holloway. The woman was homeless and out of money, living in her 1996 Oldsmobile sedan with her toddler. According to authorities, in the middle of December she arrived in Las Vegas from Portland with her daughter, parking and spending the night throughout the city. Holloway was allegedly stressed about finding a place to sleep after being chased away by security from parking lots where she'd been trying to sleep. She claimed to have snapped on the night of December the 20th of 2015 while looking for yet another place to sleep. She veered her vehicle right onto the sidewalk and then back onto the road before going back onto the sidewalk outside of Planet Hollywood. Her daughter, who was inside the vehicle, wasn't harmed. However, at least 37 pedestrians were injured, and one woman, 32-year-old Jessica Valenzuela, was killed instantly. Holloway drove away from the carnage and parked at a casino a few blocks away. She asked the valet to call 911 after explaining what she'd done. She was then taken into custody without bail. According to the Clark County Sheriff, there was no evidence that Holloway had alcohol in her system, but a drug recognition expert at the scene determined that she'd been under the influence of some kind of stimulant. Reports indicated that she'd been in state psychiatric care for several years after the incident. Due to her mental health condition, her scheduled trial in 2019 was delayed twice. In May of 2023, she rejected a plea bargain. She was scheduled to stand trial in 2024 on murder and 70 other felony charges, including child neglect, attempted murder, and battery with the use of a deadly weapon. Number 1. Esmeralda Gonzalez. On May the 31st of 2019, an Instagram model living in Las Vegas was reported missing. Surveillance footage in the 9000 block of West Torino Avenue revealed 24-year-old Esmeralda Gonzalez was last seen in the area wandering in a state of confusion during the early hours of the day in question. Meaningful developments came about 48 days later when a tipster only identified as Trisha linked 45-year-old Christopher Prestopino and 39-year-old Cassandra Garrett to Gonzalez's disappearance. According to the witness, Gonzalez ended up at Prestopino's Southwest Valley home, during which Gonzalez was given methamphetamine. Prestopino, together with Garrett, held the woman against her will by tying her up to a bedpost for an extended period, allegedly beating the victim. Garrett then injected her with a syringe of muriatic acid, which ultimately took her life. The witness also informed investigators that her remains were dumped in the desert. Finally, after 5 months, on October the 8th, detectives found a body inside a 250-gallon water tank that had been filled with concrete and covered with wood. North of Las Vegas, a Rolex watch and Chanel necklace, which were confirmed to have been owned by Gonzalez, was still on the body. After authorities executed extensive forensic work, the body was confirmed to be that of Gonzalez. 3 days later, Prestopino, along with his 31-year-old girlfriend, Lisa Mort, were arrested. The former was charged with open murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. Mort, on the other hand, was accused of aiding a felon, as she'd previously tried to warn Prestopino about the homicide investigation into Gonzalez's death on October the 18th. Garrett was apprehended in Wisconsin and extradited to Las Vegas. She was indicted on the same charges as Prestopino. Mort pleaded guilty to accessory to murder in February of 2020 and was handed a 2 to 5 year sentence behind bars. Prestopino pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping via an Alford plea. in March of 2023. He was ordered to serve 10 to 25 years in prison. Garrett, who pleaded guilty to a charge of voluntary manslaughter with a deadly weapon, was sentenced on May the 23rd of 2023 to a minimum of 8 years of incarceration with a maximum of 20 years. Thanks for watching. Which US state would you least like to live in and why? Let us know in the comments section below.